Welcome to Networking RX, a podcast devoted to helping business professionals like you enhance your networking skills in order to become more proficient giving and receiving quality business referrals and improving the overall quality of your life and the lives of those around you. The Networking RX podcast is a production of AmSpirit Business Connections, an organization whose mission is to empower business success through networking.
As I've shared on this program, I grew up in a little town in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, Houghton, Michigan. Kind of seems out of the way, kind of seems random. I wasn't from there. There's a university up there, Michigan Tech University. I moved to Houghton, Michigan when I was 8 years old because my dad got a job at Michigan Tech University. I didn't know it at the time because I was 8, and so I've had an opportunity to talk to my dad. Like, how did this all unfold that we ended up here in this tiny little town in 4 hours north of Green Bay? It's known as the snowiest town in North America. But at any rate, neither here nor there. He got his master's at Loyola of Chicago and ended up in a PhD program at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And my dad was a high school teacher and got his master's degree in education and was continuing on and wanted to get a master's or a PhD in education. In fact, I have his dissertation on my shelf at home. I keep threatening to read it, but I haven't yet. Anyhow, how'd you end up here? And as the story goes, he was in this program. And I think they had an opportunity in San Diego, and then there was this opportunity at Michigan Tech University. Now, Michigan Tech University is an engineering school. Kids go there to be engineers, physics, chemistry, all the really hard sciences. And what Michigan Tech was noticing is that, there are a lot of really bright people who just can't handle that level of math and science. They're really bright. And we're losing them, and they're going to other schools to become teachers. And why don't we have a teacher education program, which made total sense. And there was an individual that the university hired who was a year ahead of my dad at the PhD program, a guy by the name of Cal Gale. So Cal went up there to work, got the program in place, and said, okay, we have to get some other professors in place, and knew of my dad. So, that's just, I didn't know it at the time, but it's networking. It's how my dad got his job. But if you listen to this program, you know that I think that higher education does a really poor job of educating people on networking. And that's just been my sense of it. Today, I have on the program with me Bill Soderman, and Bill has a background in higher education. He's moved on from there, but he spent years in higher education, wonderful places like Hawaii. I don't know where he ever left, but he's been around. He's been in higher education, and he can certainly share with us his experiences and what he saw, and maybe what's changed and what should change. I don't know. Bill, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Frank.
So I guess you're in higher education. How did that get started? Did you just kind of know when you were in college? I want to be one of these professor people, or?
I came from a family of medical professors. My father, his brother, and their father, my grandfather, were all medical professors, primarily doing research on tropical diseases and cardiology. My father was a gastroenterologist. And I knew fairly early on in high school I did not want to be a medical doctor.
Okay.
Brother went on to do that. He's been a fairly successful medical professor. I went down a different path as an art major as an undergraduate at William and Mary. And I didn't start taking business classes until my final semester. I had some spare credit hours and thought, okay, because at the time I was thinking about doing an MBA program right out of my undergraduate. And I thought I may as well get a head start on this, see if accounting and economics are something that interested me. And they were. So I stepped straight into an MBA program at Rollins College in Winter Park. And that's where my second year, my final year, I caught the bug. I was taking a business strategy capstone, and it hit me that this teaching career in business would be a fun opportunity to meld my creative thinking with the systems thinking that goes on in business. So I worked for a year in Arlington, Virginia. And at the same time, I was applying to different doctoral programs. I got accepted at the University of Georgia, where I spent 4 years doing research on what we now call ESG investing. At the time, it was called corporate socially responsible investing. Immersed myself in strategic management, minored in information systems, but I didn't really do a lot of networking outside of the academic world when I was in Georgia. We were laser focused, like many doctoral students, on getting our studies done. I had what was considered a full teaching load, plus, juggling and having a personal life at the time. So, it was interesting when I got out. I got my first teaching position, which was a visiting position at Marquette in Milwaukee, based on a recommendation from my major professor to one of his colleagues. They were looking for a professor, so second order networking. That was a lesson
Right.
right there. And loved that job. Moved on to Southern Indiana for 3 years, and then stepped out of academia for 5 years, where I was a middle manager at a .com training company in Austin, Texas. And that's where networking really started capturing my attention in the form of conferences. Of course, back then in the late 90s, we didn't have Zoom, so there was a lot of email, a lot of phone calls, no LinkedIn, of course,
Yeah.
very much old school networking. But it struck me even back then that in the academic world, networking, when you're a young professor, is primarily focused on advancing in your field. As you get tenure and you get older, then you start doing more networking to find, opportunities for funding, opportunities to do research, collaborate, and do consulting, which many professors do. I ended up doing some consulting as well. But I don't recall in my doctoral program much of any discussion about professional networking. Nothing about civic clubs, nothing about going to conferences outside our field, which were more professional conferences. We were told, focus like a laser on your field, get tenure. And I never got tenure. I had a couple of tenure track jobs, but my publishing output was never enough to grab the attention of a tenure committee, which is fine because I love teaching, I love writing, and now I'm doing podcasts, which I think is an extension of my writing.
Yep.
And I've found, as I've stepped away from the academic world over the last few years, I pay far more attention to professional networking now. It's certainly much easier with LinkedIn, but I'm a member of a BNI chapter that I go to every week, and that really helps my local networking. Doing the podcast and going for clients for my coaching business really helps as well. And those are essential tools, of course. But I'm much more satisfied with my career now, primarily because of the networking opportunities. I feel like I get so much inspiration from talking with other entrepreneurs like yourself and my peers in the industry that some days I just kick myself and say, Bill, why didn't you do this 20 years ago?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I was the same. I mean, I graduated college, went right into law school and business school. Didn't pull my head out of academia until I was 26 years old, and then got a job, and there was work there, right? You don't need to find it; it's there. So I
Mhm.
was in my 30s before I realized, okay, well, there's something to these relationship things. It's not just competing and trying to outwork the next guy. It's like he can
Mhm.
outthink and out connect other people. But with higher education, I would hope that things are changing. I mean, they would have to change a little bit because LinkedIn and just the whole notion of having these, well, Zoom calls. When you're at the University of Georgia, it's like you're laser focused on what you're doing and your uh, the professor you're working with, your sponsor, I think would be the name. Is that correct?
Mhm. Yeah.
And so those are your relationships. Maybe my dad had my mom type up his dissertation. Right now, there's word processors and computers and that, so it's a little different. But now you would know about other people out there. To get somebody's paper, it's coming right to you. You're not having to go to the library to hunt down a journal or even wait till it gets published. It's
Mhm.
it's out there. Well, being published is all electronic anymore. Um, but it just seems to me as I read some of these studies that there's got to be stuff out there. People are doing, the guy from Rutgers is doing a study with somebody from Northwestern, and okay, they met at a conference, but maybe they went to school together. I don't know. People, I see some of these studies where it's people all over the world collaborating on this stuff. And to me, it seems like it's got to be changing. What's his name? Danny Kahneman. Um, he wrote the book, Think Fast, Think Slow, I think was the name of the book. But
Mhm.
his story, he was in economics. He was in economics and really wasn't cutting it in economics, and started to meld together psychology and economics and essentially created the field of behavioral economics. Um, you know, Economics is all very dry and graphs and whatnot, but behavioral economics is it's cutting edge because, well, as you know, humans don't always operate the way um, we're not always rational, right?
Mhm.
1 plus 1 will always equal 2. But if I put two options in front of 100 different people, and one is clearly the right choice, out of 100 people, you're going to have somebody go with the wrong choice for whatever reason. Um, and so that's kind of the melding of, okay, I'm laser focused on this economics, but it's not really cutting it. How do I just pivot a little bit to the left, a little bit to the right, and get some relevance in my world? I don't know.
It's interesting that you mentioned that because, we want to think people are rational actors, but put somebody in a Costco, they're irrational by the time they get to the checkout stand.
Oh yeah, yeah,
Yeah, between the sampling stations and looking at the end caps, it's hard to find somebody who goes into a Costco and doesn't come out with more than what they went there for.
right,
Um, Now, something else that is interesting to me is that when academics talk, we're telling our own stories to each other, but they're in very elevated language. Vocabulary is everything. Um, and while we're telling our stories, they don't necessarily relate well when we tell these stories to non-academics, which is the vast majority of the population.
sure,
Um, and one of the things I've come to grips with over my career is being able to do an elevator pitch that boils down what I'm doing into terms people can understand. Because to publish, you've got to be thinking in a different way of communication than even when you teach. I'm a very down to earth instructor, um, and part of my job when I was a university professor was being a translator. It was as someone who is an expert in a few different fields, my duty was to get undergraduate and graduate students more interested in understanding different ways that the business world works. But at the same time, um, because we didn't have a heavy emphasis on networking when I was a graduate student, I was missing that perspective.
yeah,
Um, which I think I've recovered over the last few years. Certainly in some of my work as a nonprofit executive, I very quickly came to realize that networking and establishing beneficial relationships with peers well outside of my industry and field was necessary for my own education. I always saw my professional work as a middle manager and then as an executive as, well, academics would call it a postdoc. I thought of it as necessary steps in my evolution as academics would call it being a scholar. Most people would say, becoming an expert at what you do. So it's been an interesting journey. And, my perspective is upside down because I went through my graduate education fairly early in my career, whereas most
Right.
graduate students come in with significant work experience. And I think they have a better understanding of networking as they go through their programs. Um, but there are certainly a lot of younger graduate students, especially these days, and doctoral enrollments over the last few years have been significantly high. Um, and to the point that I, I think that it's relatively easy for many young academics to lose touch. I'm constantly surprised at how few ongoing relationships I have in networking happen in the academic world. And I still have, fellow professors and graduate students who I talk to regularly. But the vast majority of my contacts are in the professional world.
Yeah.
And I,
Yeah. No, I think it's a different mindset there. Obviously networking's happening. You have to build
Mhm.
relationships, you have to get published. You have to have fun. It's not just going to magically happen.
Mhm.
Um, and they do give lip service to it, but um, I don't know that the professors really understand it, or maybe I don't want, when I say they don't care, I don't mean like the care your mom or your dad would give you, but it's the professor's coming into class, he's teaching 500 students on accounting or whatever. In the back of his mind is like, okay, I have 50 minutes here to, talk about debits and credits, um, or whatever related to accounting. And then I got to get back to my office because I'm talking to somebody about my paper, or
Mhm.
whatever. So, it's just, they just have competing, they just have differing interests, not necessarily competing interests, you know.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna mention networking to these students. It's not what you know, it's who you know, see it tomorrow
Mhm.
in class, kind of a thing.
And some of the most effective professors I've known have been professors who have emphasized networking not only in their teaching, but what they do outside of the class. In a typical research university, your publishing output counts for about 70 to 80% of your chances towards tenure, and then service and teaching count for far less, but it's the research that really counts for you. And you know, at the so-called lower tiered schools that concentrate on teaching, even that ratio may be the same. But the most effective professors I've met were the ones who are able to bridge gaps between the academic community of the university and the local community so that students could get internship opportunities. They could get practical opportunities to go out and network. I've seen some fantastically skilled students who've gone through my courses that basically started their careers or extended their careers based on their networking activity. And it wasn't necessarily something that was part of the university curriculum. It was something that they found in those particular professors' delivery of what was essential for a business person to not only survive, but to thrive in the world.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I don't know that there's an answer to the question. Is um, I guess how I sum it up is that in higher education there is networking happening. It's just a different flavor of networking than what we see in the business world. Um, it's diff different hopes and dreams, different, so different outcomes.
Mhm. And, something that's been happening over the last 10 to 20 years is the overall replacement of tenure track faculty at many universities with part-time or adjunct faculty. And I spent the last few years of my career as a part-timer teaching one or two courses a semester. But doing it, I would come in with both my academic perspective and my experience as an executive. And I always felt that my teaching and service to the university was far more effective in that role. And even with the large number of doctoral students coming out of programs, that I think it's beneficial that the model has changed more towards to emphasize adjuncts, as we call them, because they come in aware of networking. They come
Yeah,
in aware of the rules and the understandings of how the business world works. It's as much what you know as whom you know,
yeah,
because you can stand up on a soapbox in a classroom and espouse what you know, but if people aren't listening, what's the point?
yeah. Well, when you're in a classroom, keep picking on accounting. Um, when you're in an accounting class, everybody understands accounting. Now, I know there are A students and C students and people in between, but everybody understands accounting. So you haven't separated yourself there, you know.
Right. But accounting, there's the pieces that you need to operate on accepted standards and practices. And then there is a lot of in knowledge management, there is a lot of tacit information, things that we know that you only learn by working with other people. And every
Mm.
job's like this.
No, sure.
Yeah, in my last position, I was a chief learning officer in charge of employee training, and you know, I read books, I read articles, I talked with people in the field, but I learned a lot more from talking with employees, talking with managers about what they needed and how they needed it delivered. Because in most companies, training is underemphasized and underfunded. Um, and that in itself is a problem for another talk. But I've always been in adult education throughout my career, and it's hard for me to picture an enterprise that wouldn't succeed or do better without having some sort of emphasis on education within the enterprise. And it doesn't necessarily have to be higher education. Education happens in the day to day, on the job. It happens there's a learning and development expert named Josh Bersin who calls it learning in the flow.
Hmm.
And once I realized what learning in the flow was, I realized I've been doing this all my career, even when I was a graduate student.
Right.
There are just so many pieces that one has to pick up and make sense out of. And I would say, as much as networking involves working, you know, and contacting with other people, it's making sense out of these relationships.
No, that's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah, which I don't know that universities do a great job of instilling in students. There, I'm a recovering introvert. I do very well extroverting and talking with people, but I always need some background processing time to make sense of
Yeah.
what's happening and what will happen. And we don't get a lot of time for reflection in the work that we do, at least in here in the United States. In other countries, I think there is more built-in time for reflection, which is a really important part of networking. Um, and I always come from networking as how do I bring value to the relationship?
Right.
I find that the more value I bring to a relationship, then, collaterally, I will get value out of the relationship as well.
No, that's a good point. Let's shift gears here. You're not in academia anymore. You're out there, or you're working stiff like the rest of us, doing consulting and whatnot. You want to share about what you're doing and who you're looking for, how people can help you.
Okay. I've got two businesses. One is learning and development consulting for organizations. Back in the day, we would call it employee training. Now it's called corporate learning and development. But it's about, building skills and helping members of the organization build their careers and add value not only for themselves but for their teammates. So I do strategic audits. I help curate content, and I work as a trusted advisor to help point these learning and development departments and executives in ways that will maximize the amount of resources that they get. That my second business is I'm a certified focal point business coach. So I work with business owners, executives, and middle managers on how to better develop their teams, how to communicate clearly, and most of all, how to think in the long term while reconciling those needs in the short term.
Yeah.
I'm a distance runner like yourself, and as you train for races, it's always a series of stair steps as you get used to different paces and different distances. If you apply yourself and work according to plan and opportunity, then you can get to those goals. And the same thing happens in business coaching. A lot of it is instilling confidence, instilling an understanding that people already know part of what they need to succeed. It's filling in those gaps. That's something that I love to do with my clients is helping them get to the point where they can fill in those gaps between where they are now and where they want to be in next year, 3 years, 5 years.
Right.
Um, and I'm doing this late in my career, and that's got a lot of benefits because I've got some perspective. And my friends tease me because I'm always reading about AI or something else that is the next up and coming topic. But I think I've gotten to a point in my career where, as a trusted advisor, I can help people do what I do, and that's make sense of what's happening and figure out what their roles are in all of the changes that we're seeing in the business environment.
I think you're well suited for it with the academic background and the teaching background, I should say, and the business background. You had said it earlier on. You're a translator, and
Mhm.
I think sometimes that can be undervalued or overlooked. It's one thing to be smart, but to be successful, it's to truly add value from your intelligence, you've got to bring it to people, bring it down to people.
Yeah, yeah, and it's as much learning from people about what's relevant to their lives and their careers as anything else.
Yeah,
We've been noodling around with AI for decades, but it's only been in the last few years that the technology has gone to the extent that it's embedded in our smartphones, it's embedded in our systems.
yeah,
We're using AI, no, even if we don't think we're using AI. So it's not only important to understand its limitations, but the opportunities that it gives us.
yeah. Best way to get a hold of you through your LinkedIn profile?
LinkedIn profile at just search for me at Bill Sodeman, Sodeman on LinkedIn. More than happy to engage with people on LinkedIn. I'm on TikTok, Facebook, and Instagram as well. And my professional website is n3ed.com. So you can find me there and set up a call and we can chat.
Well, I appreciate your time today.
It's been a pleasure talking with you too, Frank.
Thanks for joining us on the Networking RX podcast. Please put what you've learned into action today and let us know if you have questions, comments, or ideas for future topics. You can email them to us at podcast@amspirit.com. That's AMSPIRIT.com. Finally, so you never miss an episode, be sure to subscribe to the Networking RX podcast through iTunes, Overcast, or however you receive your podcasts. Now get out and network with someone.
The Networking RX podcast is the copyright production of AmSpirit Business Connection. All rights reserved.